All right, welcome everybody to reserve seating. It is bittersweet because it is the final week of Robvember, if I get that right. We were off for a week, but I can't remember the names of stuff. Robvember, celebrating some of the favorite movies of Mr. Rob DiCristino, and we're joined by a very special guest, Michael Pomaro. How you doing, Mike?
Hey guys, thanks for
Like,
having me.
We are going to be talking about Jonathan Demme's multi-Oscar winning thriller horror movie, depending on who you ask. Non-horror fans will say it's a thriller.
yeah,
Horror fans know what's really up, that it's a horror movie. It's Silence of the Lambs from 1991. So, Rob, this is one of your favorite movies. Why don't you tell us why that is, and do you remember the first time you saw it?
now I knew you were going to ask me this question, and
Yeah,
typically I do not. I do not have that like eidetic memory that a lot of you guys have, where you remember when you saw things. I do specifically remember the first time I saw The Silence of the Lambs, and that was at my grandmother's house with my mom, my grandmother, and my uncle when I was probably about 10 years old, I want to say. Watching this on VHS, this has been one of my mom's favorite movies since it came out. And it was one of the few times I remember the sort of debate about whether or not I was old enough to see something happening sort of in front of me as well, which is sort of strange. Everyone's sort of going back and forth about what was in the movie and some of the content. And I remember eventually being allowed to watch it. And I, in fact, remember that when we put the VHS tape in, someone had already been watching it. And it started right at the scene where the SWAT teams go in to apprehend Hannibal Lecter off of the elevator. And I'm like, I'm catching a few because I'm already primed for the movie because they told me I couldn't watch it at first. So now I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
this is gonna be great. I can't wait. And I immediately see like SWAT team running in, and I'm like, this is gonna be awesome. This is gonna be the best thing ever. And I was like, oh no, wait, stop the movie, rewind the tape. Um, so again, I very rarely remember these things, but for some reason with Silence of the Lambs, I remember that exact family memory. And it's a good one because it ended up being one of my favorite movies of all time. I think of the five movies or the four movies that I picked for this series for this month, I think that this is inarguably. I think it's the best movie among them. I think it's a perfect movie, and we can get into that. And it's just something that just means the world to me.
like Rob, I don't always remember the first time I see movies, and this is no exception.
I remember not being able to see it in theaters. This was like Terminator 2 was my first R-rated movie in theaters. But I remember seeing a lot of movies in the early part of 1991 at theaters. So like I would be seeing like Home Alone, or I would be seeing Career Opportunities or something, and I was just like, "What's with that butterfly mouth movie?"
Mhm.
And like it was like looked scary, and I always figured like when I was a kid that if I like walked into a horror movie, like you just open the door and like blood would start pouring out like the elevator in The Shining. Like it was this like total like just weird kid memory of mine. Maybe this is a good place to start because Rob, you had said that you think this is a perfect movie.
I do.
I am going to be the asshole on this one a little bit because I have one question and I'm not challenging either you or Mike, but I've always had a theory about Silence of the Lambs that the scenes with Hannibal Lecter work, but they don't work in this movie. I don't feel like he fits in this movie. You know, obviously there's like expository scenes and like information that between him and Jodie Foster like you need to have, but I think like a lot of the core of the themes can be done between Ted Levine, Foster, Scott Glenn, and like throughout the investigation and through like their mentor mentee relationship and everything. And I think all the stuff with Hannibal Lecter is great. But yeah, I don't know. I just always feel like it's not of a piece. It feels, especially like the ending, the little beat at the end. I feel like that is out of a different movie, and the movie's resolved already.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So my retort for that is that um Hannibal Lecter is the only one in the movie that sees Clarice Starling for who she is. He's the only one in the movie who accesses her in an emotional way, in an intellectual way that goes beyond the way the other cops look at her. Even Jack Crawford dismisses her as a woman in a lot of ways. The fact that through those conversations with Hannibal Lecter, she's able to tap into some intuition and sort of be empowered in her sort of policing, but also in her just her emotional connection to the Catherine Martin character, the way that, as he says, sort of solving this case will allow her some inner peace, the literal silence of the lambs in her mind. The fact that those interactions provoke something in her beyond just her capacity as an agent of the law. She's constantly compensating for being a woman in the movie, and it's constantly a problem with everybody else that everyone looks down on her because of this, including the fact that she's hunting a killer of women. The fact that Hannibal's I would say his acceptance of her or his analysis of her, the fact that he's able to sort of tap into something with her, is to me key to her solving the mystery.
You had mentioned like Jack Crawford even
Mm-hmm.
sometimes kind of dismisses her. I know that there's that one scene where he asked the deputies or the sheriff like
Right.
to go in the other room and stuff like that. And I always just kind of like, I don't know. I mean, that aside, and it is maybe a slight, even though like he explains why he did it later and stuff. I don't know. For me, just on this viewing in particular, it really stood out to me. And maybe I'm wrong, because you guys are more familiar with this movie than I am, maybe. But like, I thought that was like a really healthy relationship, like especially for 1991, between like a male superior and like or male boss, I guess,
Yeah.
and then like a woman who's kind of young in her career. Like I thought that was like he admired her. He wasn't like leechy with her. He was caring about her career, saw her aptitude,
Right.
judged her on her merit and stuff like that. So I don't know. I never saw that as kind of like maybe he made a mistake or like he was testing her and stuff and she didn't understand it at the time. But like I don't know. I always saw that as, and maybe that's why in part I feel like the Hannibal Lecter thing is an odd fit, because I feel like the real heart of the movie, in some way at least, is between the two of them.
I think that's really interesting. And I think I watching it this time around, I actually sort of took note of that too, Adam, that I wonder if that the relationship between the two of them, especially for the time the movie came out, felt unique, and maybe unique in movies specifically. Like that scene where he explains himself when they're in
Mhm.
the car. Like I think that's a wonderful scene. I don't know that
Yeah.
I've seen that in another movie.
I think that the key moment is the end of the movie is the handshake, though. I think that in that moment after the cake, which we'll talk about, Adam,
We
um,
gotta get to the cake.
we got to get to the cake. The fact that they have that moment where he congratulates her and he says, your father would have been proud of you and so on and so forth. And there's that moment where he looks at her and he's kind of like not sure what to do because he knows what he would do if it was a guy. He knows what it would do if it was his child, maybe, or whatever, but she's somewhere in between. And that's when she kind of recomposes herself. It's one of my favorite moments in the movie. She sort of recomposes herself and she offers her hand.
Yeah.
It's kind of, he goes like, right, you are a person, you are an agent, right? Like, so I do think until the end of the movie he's still a bit condescending. I do think he's still undervaluing her. I do think he's still kind of, I don't necessarily read it, it seems like maybe that way. I do think a lot of the advancement comes in other avenues in the character, but I do think by the end they do get there, and I think that's what makes that part
Okay.
so important.
I feel like he's only excusing himself so that she can take the Hannibal Lecter phone call by herself. Like, I don't understand, like, unless he's just like afraid of the blowback of not enough pieces of cake for everybody and he
Right.
doesn't want that
It's a
awkwardness.
huge problem.
Yeah, like,
Has he ever been more relatable, Adam? Like
So for those who haven't just been in Adam and my text thread, which is most people, for like a week now, we've been talking about this cake and the fact that this FBI cake, which I'm sure at this point in the video I've shown 3 or 4 times, um, is it's massive. It's a big cake, but also the woman cutting it is cutting pieces that are too large for everybody. There's only going to be like 10 people. And also she doesn't cut it close enough to, she's doing triangular cuts and she doesn't do it close enough to the center so there's going to be symmetry. There's going to be a big chunk of cake left over in the middle. Like she doesn't go deep enough into the cake when she's cutting it. So she should have done squares. There should be a grid pattern here. There should be small square pieces instead of this big gigantic one here in the center. It's caused a lot of problems.
we see her, right, like actually like finish cutting the slice, right?
Yes.
So I start to panic thinking like, what if she fucked up that take? What if somebody
Right.
fucked up the take? What do they do? Do they have
They probably have multiple cakes, I guess.
backup.
But
right? They probably have multiple cakes.
but then the other question becomes like, was that the best take they got? Because she didn't cut it far enough. Like it's bad cut. This is see Demi. You know what? Hack. You know what?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm glad I'm bringing this down to my
Yeah,
level now.
yeah.
Yeah. One
No.
thing I'll always adore this movie for is it gave my boy Ted Levine a career.
Oh, 100%. Ted Levine, who's gone on to play weirdos and cops and authority figures and just all
Yeah.
manner of characters. What a wonderful actor.
I
Yeah.
read he deliberately like tried to avoid playing serial killers because he didn't want to get typecast. I know that he got like one thing I love about just movies and actors' careers is like when you pop in a movie like this, and
Mhm.
then you get like what's your bump where like you get elevated to like, a co-lead or like
Right.
a main villain. And his was Jean-Claude Van Damme's Nowhere to Run, where he played kind of like a mercenary type dude who like had a deck of card trick, and then when he gets blown away at the end, spoiler, the cards explode from his suit pocket, and it's just like now we know the Joker has died.
What are our favorite parts of this movie? What are our favorite scenes and sequences? Because this movie for me was such an unlocking of certain tropes in movies. I've gone on to read and love the whole, as I said before, the sort of Thomas Harris kind of universe. But the sort of meeting with the psychopath behind the bars type trope that we've seen 1,000 times, since
Hmm.
then. Um, has really become one of my favorite things in any story is just going to meet the guy, talking to the guy, getting clues about the thing, going out and solving the thing, checking back in. I mean, the initial meeting between Hannibal and Clarice is I just think it's monumental in ways that I can't even really process.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's my go-to answer as well. And that's always been maybe my favorite scene. And
Mhm.
now that I watch a lot of these movies that I've seen a million times with my kids, seeing it through their eyes is always fun. And that scene in particular, when the camera just sort of collides
Yeah,
to reveal Hannibal
and he's just
standing there,
standing there.
my daughter Evie was
Yeah.
almost tapped out.
Did she
Like,
like
nah.
it? Did she like
uh,
the movie?
no, so she's in high school,
Yeah.
and in one of her classes they had to read modern classic books. They had to pick a modern classic,
Okay.
and one of the options was Silence of the Lambs. And she had heard me talk about it, so she does not like scary movies or anything,
Right.
but she still chose Silence of the Lambs. She was about halfway through the book and said, "I think I want to watch the movie, even though I'm not finished with the book." By the end of the movie, she handed me the book and said, "Please get this out of my room." It
Wow.
the
Okay.
movie like it worked,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it scared the hell out of her.
I love how well edited the movie is because it's like, this is one of those rare occasions, and you guys were talking about this on the Hypnotic Patreon. Sounds of the Lambs better than Hypnotic, probably. I haven't seen it, but I'll go out on a limb. This is the opposite of that, where like you think that you've watched 20 minutes and then you hit the thing and it says it's like 45 minutes in because this
Yeah.
movie just zips by and it's
Yep.
got like a real kind of just thrust to it. And I think that that whole suspense sequence in the middle of Hannibal Lecter, being taken out of his cell to talk to the senator, and then like his escape and everything like that. I think it's just so beautifully put together, and yeah, it's like just the little kind of kick that you need like in the middle of the movie and everything. And I think that's also kind of the Jonathan Demme touch to this too. Like this could be, and I don't say this as like a negative comparison to like Ridley Scott or Brett Ratner, I guess maybe to Brett Ratner,
Maybe.
but like it's more hysterical, operatic in tone. And the thing that makes it so creepy is that Jonathan Demme plays everything very, you know, on the level. It's much more realistic. It's much more blunt. It's like kind of reminiscent to the tone of like a Henry the Portrait of the Serial Killer and stuff like that, where it's just like horrible things have happened and now we're going to like talk about it without any type of like pomp and circumstance and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
And I mean, I think it goes without saying, with like, Tak Fujimoto's sort of subjective camera, the idea of, we don't have to go through all this, but it's been written about, it's been spoken about. I've written and spoken about the movie so much on the website already. You can already go back and look at all that stuff. But the other thing I always have to point out, you mentioned kicks a minute ago, and that reminded me of Inception. And it reminded me that when I teach film, when I teach editing, when I do parallel editing, we talk about how scenes sort of play in cinematic time over each other. I always show two scenes. I always show the van sequence from Inception. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's floating around in the hallway, and then they're driving in the van and all that, and showing the relationship between those scenes. And then I show them the flower delivery scene from Silence of the Lambs with the doorbell, and how it's an unreliable parallel narrator. The idea that the movie tricks you into thinking that she's at the house, and so on and so forth. So those two things showing that sort of cinematic trick, I think it's another one of those masterful moments in the movie that I don't even know how often. I mean, I'm sure other movies have done it. I'm sure other movies have done it since Silence of the Lambs. I don't even know when. I couldn't name a single time it's been attempted, really, though.
This movie has great opening credits fonts. I've been like desperately hoping Microsoft PowerPoint adds that font.
Good fonts. Yeah, good fonts.
So good. I do want to ask you guys what your top 3 Demi movies are.
It's going to be the most unoriginal answer. I think it's this. It's probably Rachel getting married. And Something Wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine would be this, Something Wild, and Married to the Mob.
I would go Stop Making Sense. This, and then it's really, I can't decide between Philadelphia and Rachel Getting Married. It would be one of those two. But Something Wild is so good also.
Yeah. This movie for me is, Clarice Starling is my favorite movie character of all time. Specifically in this movie, maybe not so much in Ridley Scott's Hannibal, but it opened up so much for me in terms of not only just the kinds of movies I like to watch, but also just the kinds of characters I like to see, the kind of plots I like to see. And it, as I said before, really introduced me to the sort of Hannibal world, which I love, and Brian Fuller's Hannibal show, which is great. Just endures as one of my favorites.
No, this movie's great. This month was really fun. Cause Rob, I don't know if you know this, but you got pretty good taste in movies. If these are some of your favorites. So.
Let's do Mike month at some point.
You know what?
Do it.
All right, I'm gonna throw this out there. I said in February we should do video game movie month because it kind of coincides with fantasy sci-fi fuck up podcast. So we've done like Highlander, and then we did like the VR series and stuff, but I'm gonna do it. I kind of want it to be Mike month in February.
I mean, I'd be happy to, but I feel like you guys need to sleep on this before you.
To sleep on it means yes.
February is Mike month.
All right. That means I have to talk.
February, 4 of Mike's favorite movies.
Coming in 2024.
It would be great if you're like, it's Highlander 2.
Mike, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you guys.
We're back next week with Holiday Mailbag. So send us your questions. Leave them in the comments. We love you. Until next time. This cake is reserved.